God's chosen ones, why you look younger after awakening. It's not genetics. The mirror lied to her. She stood there, in silence, one hand resting on the sink, the other brushing against the edge of the mirror. It was supposed to be just another morning, but something felt different. Not in the air, but in her own reflection. She wasn't imagining it. Her skin looked softer. Her eyes shimmered, not from sleep or makeup, but from something deeper, like light escaping from within. The lines that once carried stories of stress and heartbreak now whispered something gentler, something holy. This wasn't about beauty. It wasn't about age. It was about truth. She leaned closer, half afraid to believe it, half ready to break open. "I should look older by now," she whispered. But heaven whispered back, "You're not aging. You're returning." Because something had shifted, not in the products she used or the food she ate, but in her soul. She had stopped apologizing for her joy. She had cried the weight out of her face. She had stopped carrying other people's burdens as her own. And now her body was telling the truth. Her heart already knew. She wasn't fading, she was becoming. So if your face has been glowing for no reason, if people keep asking if you've done something different, maybe the mirror isn't lying. Maybe God is finally letting the real you rise. And if you're one of God's chosen, then this message was written in heaven with your name on it, the glow that didn't come from a cream. It started in the smallest, most forgettable moment. A Tuesday morning. No makeup, no miracle routine. Just sunlight falling across the edge of a kitchen mirror. Rachel, 47, paused mid-sip of her tea. Something about her own reflection caught her breath, not because she looked flawless, but because she looked free. Her eyes didn't carry that familiar cloud anymore, the one she'd worn like armor. Her skin looked not younger exactly, but less burdened, as if it had finally exhaled after years of holding everything in. And she couldn't explain it. There was no new serum on the counter, no juice cleanse, no spiritual retreat, just silence, just surrender. She had wept enough to fill rivers over the last few years. Divorce papers, her mother's funeral, nights alone staring at ceiling cracks and asking God why peace always felt one room too far. But something had shifted, not because she fought harder, because she stopped fighting. She stopped begging for answers, stopped performing for people who only loved the palatable parts of her, and stopped running from her own softness, stopped wearing clothes that didn't feel like breath. And somewhere between all of that letting go, something holy returned. Joy. Joy, the kind that didn't shout. Joy that hummed quietly beneath the ribs, waiting for the body to believe in it again. It wasn't loud. It was light, and now her body was listening. But her face? It began to mirror peace, not perform it. Her smile came easier, even when no one was watching. Her laugh didn't feel like rebellion. It felt like remembrance. People had started asking, "Did you lose weight? New haircut? Something's different about you." He didn't have the words. Not yet. How do you explain to people that when you stopped carrying trauma, your posture changed? When you stopped pretending you were fine, your voice deepened? That when you cried in God's arms long enough, your face started glowing again? How do you say, "This isn't self-care, this is soul return"? So instead, she wrote one sentence in her journal that morning. "I'm not getting younger, I'm just finally not hiding." And maybe that's what spiritual awakening really looks like. Not floating, not crystals, not overnight enlightenment, just waking up one day, looking in the mirror, and realizing, I'm not aging, I'm aligning. Part 1. the divine wound that let the light in. The first wrinkle didn't show up on her face. It showed up in her face. It was a hairline fracture, barely visible, the kind only heaven could see, where belief had once stood solid, now trembling under the weight of unanswered prayers. Rachel had spent 3 nights on the cold vinyl bench outside her mother's ICU room. Her phone was on silent. Her prayers were louder than ever. She kept asking the same thing. But if you're good, why does love die like this? The hospital lights didn't blink in response. God didn't speak. Her mother didn't wake. She aged 10 years in that hallway, not just in skin, in soul. That's what grief does. It doesn't just age your body, it scorches your timeline. But even fire can birth something sacred. On the 4th day, the nurse stopped beside her with quiet reverence. She didn't offer pity, she offered presence. From her pocket she slid out a Bible, worn, tender, and full of personal highlights. She opened to Psalm 34:18 and whispered, "The Lord is close to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Rachel didn't respond, but she remembered, and somehow that verse became a thread in her soul, the first stitch in a garment she hadn't worn in years. Hope. The days that followed were blurry. Funeral programs, empty casseroles, phone calls from people who meant well but stayed shallow. But something unexplainable began to stir. One morning, as she stared into the bathroom mirror, she caught something strange in her own eyes. Not devastation, but depth. Not despair, but clarity. She wasn't healed, but she had stopped pretending. She had stopped putting on the mask of "I'm okay." And that, in its own sacred way, began to change her face. The shadows under her eyes softened, not because they disappeared, but because she had stopped being ashamed of them. The tension in her jaw loosened, because she no longer needed to clench through the pain. The harsh lines around her mouth faded, not from filler, but from forgiveness. Because here's what no one tells you. Spiritual awakening doesn't just restore your soul, it starts returning your face to peace. Grief had aged her, yes. The surrender was beginning to rewind her. And one day, without fanfare or fireworks, she caught herself in the mirror and whispered, "I don't know what's happening, but I look more like me than I have in years." The wound didn't disappear, but it had done what only divine wounds can do. It let the light in. Part 2. When the eyes start glowing again. It was the kind of day people forget. Overcast, soft rain tapping on windows, the kind where everything feels a little slower, like even time needs a nap. Rachel sat by the cafe window, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. She wasn't waiting for anything in particular. She had just started craving spaces where she could be anonymous and still seen. The barista, maybe 20, bright eyes and a name tag that read Eli, came by with a refill and paused. He didn't speak at first, just looked at her with a tilted head and said, "Sorry, this might sound weird, but your eyes are kind of glowing." Rachel blinked. She glanced at her reflection in the rain-specked glass. Just a soft outline of herself, nothing glamorous, no makeup today, just skin and soul. "Must be the light," she muttered, brushing it off. But she knew it wasn't. Something had been happening. Quietly, steadily, her eyes had been changing. Not in color, in clarity. It wasn't about hue, it was about honesty. She remembered the days her eyes had gone grey, not from age, but from carrying the unspoken. The grief, the guilt, the pretending. But lately, she'd caught herself seeing differently, and not just with her eyes. She could walk into a room and feel things before a word was spoken. She could sense joy clinging to strangers like perfume, or feel pain swimming in someone's silence. She didn't ask for it, didn't train for it, but her spirit had been tuned and her vision followed. You see, the soul doesn't hide forever. Eventually it finds a way to leak out. And for Rachel, it was in her eyes. She cried more easily now, but not just from sadness. She cried when songs hit the right chord, when someone showed kindness, when she saw a mother braid her daughter's hair in a parking lot, because something sacred had returned. Tenderness. And that tenderness wasn't weakness, it was worship. Your eyes don't glow because you're young, the spirit whispered. They glow because they've stopped lying. Back at the cafe, Ely poured the coffee and smiled nervously. I don't know. You just look really peaceful, like you've seen things, but you're not afraid anymore. Rachel laughed softly, tears behind her smile. She didn't tell him the whole truth, that she had seen things. She had seen her world fall apart, seen people walk away without goodbye, seen death, betrayal, silence from God, and the slow miracle of rising anyway. She didn't tell him all that. She just said, "Thank you, I think I'm just finally seeing clearly." And maybe that was it. Maybe when you stop seeing through fear, shame, and self-hatred, your eyes stop holding back. Maybe that's what makes them shine. Not pigment, but presence. Because when you've survived spiritual warfare and still choose to love, the light doesn't just return to your life. It starts pouring out of your eyes. She hadn't planned to stay long. It was just a small family gathering. Cupcakes, laughter, crumpled wrapping paper, and children chasing each other in circles. The kind of ordinary day that once felt exhausting. Too many voices, too many masks. But today, something was different. Rachel sat at the edge of the table, a paper plate in her lap and frosting on her thumb, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she caught herself smiling. Not because someone said something funny, but because she was simply happy to be here. April leaned in, squinting. "Okay, wait, not to sound creepy, but you seriously look younger. What are you doing? New skincare?" Rachel laughed, eyes glistening. "Nothing," she said. "Actually, probably less than ever." But that wasn't the full truth. The full truth was this. She had stopped hiding behind performance. She had stopped holding her jaw so tightly it ached by noon. She had stopped trying to control every outcome. And joy, that wild, radiant, unapologetic joy, had started coming back, first to her breath, then to her face. You see, sorrow etches itself into the face in invisible ways. Not just through wrinkles, but through habits. Tightened lips from words never spoken. A fixed smile to mask fear. Brows that furrowed from years of overthinking. But when God begins to heal the soul, the body follows. And one of the first places it shows, the face. Not the makeup, not the cheekbones, the softness. Lately, Rachel had noticed something unusual. She smiled while driving. She smiled folding laundry. She even smiled, alone in the grocery store aisle, remembering a joke from her childhood. Not because life was easy, but because for the first time she wasn't filtering her joy through pain. Her cheeks didn't hurt from faking it. They rose naturally, like praise lifted to heaven. She wasn't smiling to be polite. She was smiling because peace had come to sit inside her again. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Rachel stood in her bathroom again. The same mirror where she'd once begged for a sign that things would change. She studied herself. Her eyes weren't just brighter. Her skin wasn't just clearer. Her whole expression had changed. The tension was gone. The apology, gone. The hardness melted. She ran her fingers along her own jawline and whispered with wonder, "My face is remembering joy." That's the moment you know you're not just healing, you're aligning, you're becoming. You're allowing God to rewrite the map of your body, not with cosmetics, but with compassion. And the joy? It's not loud. It's holy. Part 4. The body that refused to carry trauma anymore. She never used to walk in the mornings. There was a time when just getting out of bed felt like dragging a broken house across a gravel road. The weight of grief had sunk into her spine. Her knees ached. Her breath was shallow, not from sickness, but from suppression. For years, she didn't know she was carrying things God never asked her to hold. But now her body had begun doing something radical, something rebellious, something holy. It started saying no. No to tight clothing that felt like armor. No to food that felt like punishment. No to people who drained her with fake smiles and forced intimacy. She didn't announce it. She didn't make a new me post. She just listened. And the more she listened, the more her body began to change. Not in weight, but in wisdom. One morning, as she walked barefoot across the dew-soaked grass, linen pants swaying, arms loose at her sides, a jogger passed by and did a double take. He smiled. "You look like peace," he said, breathless. Rachel blinked. She didn't know how to respond. She wanted to say, "This peace came at a price. I had to weep it out of my bones." Because the truth is, healing doesn't always look pretty. It looks like rest after years of false performance. It looks like naps in the middle of unfinished tasks. It looks like listening to your hunger and your heartbreak. There was a time she wore layers upon layers, emotionally and physically. Shapewear, shamwear, smiles stitched like armor. Now, she reached for softness. Clothes that breathed with her, colors that whispered freedom. Because trauma had once made her shrink, but now her body was expanding, not in size, but in sacred space. She sat beneath a tree, toes buried in earth, and heard the whisper again, the one that didn't come from outside. It said, "You're not tired because you're weak. You're tired because you carried too much for too long." She exhaled, and in that breath she felt it. The release, the exodus, the shedding. Her posture had changed. Her digestion was better, even her sleep deeper, more restorative. Not because she found the right wellness guru, but because she surrendered. She stopped managing her healing like a to-do list and started trusting it like a holy process. Her body was not the enemy. It was the archive of every prayer she had survived. And now, it was becoming a sanctuary. Part 5. The Return of the Inner Child. She didn't mean to drive by. It was an impulsive turn, one of those holy detours God orchestrates when you're ready to face what you thought you'd buried for good. The house was smaller than she remembered. Time had peeled the paint from the porch. The fence leaned like it had grown weary of holding things in. But the backyard? That part looked unchanged. Wild, unmanicured, untouched by years. Rachel stepped out of the car and walked barefoot through the grass, the smell of honeysuckle flooding memories she didn't know were still in her bones. There, under the walnut tree, that's where she used to play. That's where she buried her stuffed bear after her dad left. That's where she whispered prayers no one heard. That's where she first asked God if she mattered. And as she stood in that spot again, the wind whispered through the branches, and she felt it before she saw it. A vision, a memory, a visitation. Her younger self, maybe 7 years old, standing barefoot, hands stained from dirt and dreams, smiling, with a gap in her teeth and fire in her soul. And she wasn't crying. She wasn't afraid. She looked free. Rachel didn't move. She just watched as that little girl ran, arms outstretched, spinning in circles, like joy was oxygen and twirling was praise. And then she felt it, not outside her body, but from within. She never left. God whispered. She was waiting for you to remember her. Tears streamed down Rachel's cheeks, not from sadness, but from reunion. She hadn't lost herself. She had just forgotten where she was buried. And this healing journey, the grief, the glow, the surrender, had been digging her out. Not to become someone new, but to return to someone eternal. The inner child, the original flame, the unfiltered spirit. A butterfly landed on her hand. She didn't flinch. She just smiled. The same smile she used to wear when singing into hairbrushes or pretending clouds were castles. She laughed. Not to entertain, not to charm, not to deflect, but because joy was finally unblocked. She skipped. Yes, skipped. To the edge of the yard, before catching herself and laughing again, shaking her head. Who even am I right now? And the answer came not as a thunderous declaration, but as a gentle remembrance. You're the girl you used to be, with the wisdom of the woman you've become. That night, in her journal, she wrote one line. The child I buried in grief has come home to dance in the light. Because when the inner child stops hiding, you stop apologizing for joy, and when joy walks freely through your body, you don't just look younger, you become timeless. Heaven restored what time tried to steal. Later that week, Rachel returned to the same mirror, the one that once made her cry because it only showed loss. But this time, it showed light. Not perfection, not illusion, just light. She studied the woman in the glass, and for the first time in years, she didn't wince. She smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because she was no longer pretending it had to be. Her face wasn't hiding. Her eyes weren't apologizing. Her presence wasn't shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. She wasn't trying to look young. She was simply letting go of everything that made her soul feel old. I haven't reversed age, she whispered. I've returned to the me I buried under survival. And just like that, she knew. She wasn't aging backwards for the world. She was aligning deeper for heaven. The world may keep asking, what's your secret? New diet? Guide? Love life? Retreat? Let them wonder. Let them chase creams and serums, while your soul becomes the oil that anoints your face with peace. Because here's the truth, the sacred, unmarketable, unfiltered truth. You didn't glow up, you grew through. You didn't become younger, you became younger in truth. Because when your spirit returns to its original frequency, the body follows. Maybe God didn't remove the years. He removed what was never yours to carry through them. Maybe you're not glowing because of luck. You're glowing because you finally believed peace belonged on your face. If your reflection started smiling back again, are you sure you're not healing deeper than anyone can see? Are you sure you're not one of God's chosen just because no one called you radiant? If this story made something in you breathe again, if you saw yourself in Rachel's silence, her softness, her sacred return, then this space is for you. Comment, I'm not aging, I'm returning. Share this story if someone you love is carrying years they were never meant to bear. And if your mirror is finally reflecting your truth, subscribe, because the next story will go even deeper. And it just might carry the words your soul's been waiting for. This isn't about beauty. It's about becoming. Welcome back to your original glow.